Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about album number 8 from Squarepusher, Ultravisitor. Right, so the last couple of Squarepusher albums have digressed pretty heavily from what I initially found appealing in the man's music. What I've always loved about Squarepusher is his incorporation of jazz into his music. And while his straight electronic stuff can be really great sometimes, I'm still going to prefer stuff that has a bit more melody or jazz influence in there. And I also didn't want the last album I cover on the channel before I go on break for about a week or so, thanks to final exams, to be a subpar selection of Go Plastic B-sides. So, let's just get this out of the way. Long story short, he did finally deliver on the kind of stuff I like from him the most. At this point in Squarepusher's career, Ultravisitor was the most enjoyable and interesting he'd been since music has rotted one note. It's a semi-live album that basically combines the appeals of nearly every previous album of his. Most notably, it's got the jazzy weirdness of music has rotted one note. It's also got some of his noisiest and most out there tracks, like Go Plastic. But there's also kind of like a consistent feed me weird things spookiness. Not really the same kind of spookiness as feed me weird things, just similar. Is it amazing all the way through? Kinda hard to say. I love the first couple of tracks, and I love the last couple of tracks, and the stuff in between goes pretty far out there, and I gotta be in the right mood to fully get into it. But regardless of how much personal enjoyment I might find in that middle section at any given point, I think he consistently brings his A-game across the length of this album. The whole thing is either among his most enjoyable or among his most impressive. Or both. And there's no cheap daddy jokes here either. It's one of his most serious albums in quite a while as well, as you can kinda tell from the album cover there. So, let's go down track by track. So, to start out with, the first 4 tracks on this thing are all excellent. The title track here provides a good tone setter. It's a long, sprawling, fast-paced, epic opener, with our usual drum and bass beats being paired up with lots of harrowing and complex melodies. While maybe not quite up on Tundra level of haunting, it's not far behind. And while not the catchiest, the track keeps changing and evolving and consistently keeps me on the edge of my seat. And right after that we get Fulcrum, a mysterious-sounding, mostly pure solo bass-playing excursion that once again shows the dude's incredible chops. Maybe even more so than on previous albums. This album actually has a lot of pure bass-playing tracks on it, ranging quite a bit in tone, from the calm and comforting Andrei to the funky and experimental C-Town Smash. Leave Mike alone, dude. Every time, the dude's bass playing is excellent and creates interesting and engaging compositions that feel like they're doing more than just acting purely as showcases for his chops. So yeah, going back into the other tracks, we of course gotta talk about Iambic 9 poetry. Now, I do half wish it wasn't called that, since that immediately brings up the comparison to Iambic 5 poetry, and I do not consider this track to be better in any way. But it is still one of the big highlights on this album, playing some warm and simplistic melodies repeatedly over a full live band accompaniment, and gradually shifting the tempo around to keep you on your toes. Do 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 do. The track has this really bright and sunny, but heavily nostalgic vibe to it as well. Quite the powerful piece purely on its own merits. But now we gotta get into the middle section. It's almost half of the album, 7 tracks, but whatever. 50 Cycles is the point at which the album really starts to get weird, featuring little to nothing in the way of melody, and once again reprising Jenkinson's physics textbook-sounding rapping from F-Train on the previous album. However, unlike F-Train, 50 Cycles is more than just like a gimmicky experiment. It takes that idea from that track and fleshes it out into a full 8-minute experimental track that would have been perfectly serviceable even without Jenkinson's rapping. The track is really complex and interesting, and all the synth effects have that dark Miles Davis weirdness, like some of those interludes from Music Has Rotted One Note. The whole thing does have a pretty compelling and spooky atmosphere that I can get behind, even if, again, I could stand to be in the right mood for it. And a lot of the other tracks from the middle section are similarly weird and out there. Mendelek has plenty of micro-editing and crazy Go Plastic-esque moments, but also some delightfully unnerving atmospheric effects as well. And Steinbolt is probably the most insane and intense moment on this thing. Screeching sounds and abrasive editing and guitar-like distortion among a sea of amen breaks at first, but later bring in these giant church organ-like synth pads that just make the track all the more impressive sounding and insane. Again, I wouldn't really say this kind of track is typically my thing, but I don't skip it either. The production and attention to detail on this thing is more than enough to make up for the abrasiveness and listening difficulty. Isn't it's hard to listen to sometimes, but whatever. Good track. Then we got an Arched Pathway, which is like half off-kilter bass workout and half percussive experimental weirdness popping up in random times. Like, most of the beginning is just like little noisy percussion loops stuttered so heavily they sound like your computer's about to blue screen. And the bass is often accompanied by more atonal Miles Davis-style strangeness. And the interlude Telluric piece focuses specifically on that strangeness, more atonal ambience that sounds like heavily stuttered scraping sometimes. Another one of those tracks that could have fit pretty snugly on Music is Rotted One Note, at least if it weren't for the micro-editing. I don't think that's really a thing on that album. And then District Line 2 is yet another amen break-heavy excursion with plenty of vocal samples modulated and edited into oblivion, just like on Go Plastic, but featuring some barely recognizable bass playing so heavily modulated it doesn't sound like it actually plays a single note. That's where the middle section ends, though, and the last 4 tracks, once again, are excellent and return to a more familiar brand of enjoyability for me. Circlewave starts out with an acoustic drum solo, but then plays these haunting and archaic organ melodies over it. It really starts to send chills up my spine, and the chord progression is pretty memorable, too. And then Tetra-Sync is maybe my favorite track in the whole bunch. It also mainly starts out with an extended drum solo, but then slowly picks up speed and gains some more haunting melodies fitting well next to Circlewave, and just getting more and more intense and complex and epic as well. I mean, it doesn't really have a memorable hook, maybe kinda comes close with a pretty consistent chord progression carrying on through a big chunk of the track. But what it does have is incredible bass playing and drumming performances, including multiple solos of both, great spooky tension and almost soundtrack-worthy atmosphere in the melodies, lots of weird and experimental textures thrown in to keep things interesting and engaging, and just all-around incredible soundcraft. This track alone is seriously one of the best things Tom Jenkinson has ever done, and I'm surprised more people don't talk about it. And finally, on that most epic and climactic of moments on this album, we close out with 2 very laid-back and almost ambient passages. Tommib Help Bus is a super simplistic and minimalistic, but effective piece played on the electric Rhodes piano, quite frankly a much more effective and memorable piece than the similarly titled track from Go Plastic. And Every Day I Love, our closer, is a chamber music style solo bass piece that takes us out on a warm, touching, and pleasant note. So that's a lot of material to cover, and maybe from my descriptions Ultravisitor may sound highly disjointed. I was kind of planning on mentioning that in this video, but that's the most interesting thing, because it's really not that disjointed. Everything from the pure abrasive insanity of something like Steinbolt to the warm minimalism of the final 2 tracks do not feel out of place together on this album. It's kind of hard for me to put my finger on how exactly it all works so well together, but I guess it's that everything does sort of have that live aesthetic. There's nothing so purely percussive like some of those most intense moments from Go Plastic, everything is at least taking from the same general sound palette and trying to build a somewhat consistent atmosphere and headspace, and that's pretty spooky and strangely effective and well put together. The atmospheric elements on those more abrasive tracks makes it much more likely that I'll be in the mood for them at the same time as those more melodic and low-key tracks. Even if not necessarily all of the time, it's kind of hard to explain. Yeah, if there's actual problems I might have with Ultravisitor, I suppose the big one is that it doesn't really reveal anything super new to us about Squarepusher that we didn't already know previously. He didn't establish a new side to himself that wasn't previously established or try something out of his comfort zone. It just kind of brought together a lot of different sounds he'd already explored, just in a very strong and well-executed manner. And on top of that, I know I compared this album sort of to Feed Me Weird Things in its atmosphere, but the melodies are not quite on Feed Me Weird Things' level. I wouldn't really say any of them are the best melodies he's ever come up with. I mean, Iambic 9 Poetry, Circlewave, maybe Tommib, Help Bus are fairly catchy and memorable. But other tracks on here, despite how much I might be able to get into them while I'm listening to them, kinda disappear from my mind when I'm done. Most notably the title track, and Tetra-Sync to a somewhat lesser extent. But whatever, the things I like about Ultravisitor far outweigh the things I don't like about it. This is an incredibly solid electronic jazz hybrid executed in a way that only Squarepusher could do. It has just barely enough of a unique feel to it to separate itself from the rest of his catalog, and I would definitely classify this one as an essential listen, one of my favorites from the guy, for sure. I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today, see you next time.